Welcome to our Charm Club exhibit entitled Point of Exchange. The Charm Club first met in January of 1987 here at the SullivanMunce Cultural Center here in Zionsville. Betsy Harris, a resident of Zionsville, and Cheryl Spence, who was the first owner of Quilts Plus, had the idea to form a group of ladies who would come together with the purpose of exploring and making charm quilts. We met once a month at members' houses, and the purpose of that was so that we could share our fabric. We would cut a swatch from all of the fabric that they had in order to make the charm quilts. The goal of the charm quilt is not to repeat a fabric. This happens to be our 17th exhibit here at the museum, and we're so honored that they lend us the facility and put up such a beautiful show each year. Today's exhibit has changed greatly since that time in 1987. Many of our quilts were hand-pieced and hand-quilted. Today, we're mainly machine piecers and machine quilters. You'll see a little bit of hand piecing and a little bit of hand quilting. Our members have changed, but the constant here in our group is diversity. We love and respect how each of us works, the style that we work in, the colors we use, and it's a very encouraging group. Our first theme that we are going to be talking about today is point of view. That could be anything that you can see, anything that you can think, any way you want to take it is our point of view. Our second challenge is returning to our roots on sharing fabric. In our first, we did the Charm Club and we exchanged our fabrics. This time we still did it, but we each brought a fat quarter of a yard of our favorite fabric to exchange with each other. The perimeters that we put on that was that it must be a cool fabric from the color wheel, green, blue, or purples. So it was very exciting to see that palette of fabric with which we got to work. For the Point of View Challenge, Beautiful Earth was created by Anita Hardwick. It is an original design. It is machine pieced and machine quilted. It is inspired by a picture of a coral reef. The beautiful colors that are in coral reefs is represented in here. The different blues of the ocean are in there also. It is amazing to me that the color palette changes so depending on what blue that color is next to. I find that as the point of view because I feel like we are destroying our earth by invasive species, by pollutants, and I believe it's showing up predominantly in those coral reefs that we do find so beautiful. Lollipop Trees by Anita Hardwick. It was made and quilted by Anita. It is an original design. It is from the Fabric Exchange Challenge. The quilt is curved pieced, has a peaceful stream flowing beside these funky little trees. When I saw the cool fabric palette, it just reminded me of a day by the stream. So it has fusing of the trees. It is machine quilted, and it's just a fun, whimsical quilt. Midnight Light, made by Anita Hardwick, is also from the Fabric Exchange. We had little scraps left over from when I did the first one, and I thought we might as well use these up. So the star is a lone star. Back in our earlier years of Charm Club, I had pieced a lone star and we did applique around it. So I thought I needed to revisit that lone star. After trying to machine piece that star, I decided it was best to hand piece it. So those little diamonds are hand pieced. It is machine pieced into a background that's unusual for a lone star. It has a lot of the homespun plaids and checks in them. Fused on are little tiny green and blue strips of fabric, and it is machine quilted with silk thread, trying to keep into the scale of a miniature quilt.
Hi, my name is Connie Lancaster, and I am one of the newer members of the Charm Club. This is my second time to display in a Charm Club show. So my first quilt is called On the Vine, and it's a design that I saw in a magazine several years ago. And the fabric challenge for this display was the perfect chance to do that. The designer is named Bonnie Christine, and the article that she published was called Succulents, and it was in the Simply Modern magazine issue number 5. The techniques that I used for this quilt are raw edge applique and freehand machine quilting. I pieced the background with an assortment of light, low volume prints, and then I installed the quilt on my alarm arm machine sideways. With none of the applique in place yet, I had an open canvas to go ahead and continue. I took all of the leaves and I laid them in the positions that I wanted them to be, just visualizing that they would be on a vine. I used a little dab of glue at the tip of each leaf to hold it in place temporarily. I threaded up a beautiful, brilliant purple thread and then started quilting the vines and the leaves. I went over top of the leaves and the vines several times to give it some definition, but each of the leaves is still raw edge exposed. The color challenge was interesting, and at first I thought I would stick with the cool colors, but I couldn't resist adding several more warmer and spicier colors to the mix. My second quilt is called It Takes a Village, and it's in the point of view section of our challenge. I used collage techniques, which is fusible applique, and created a village of bright and light colored buildings that fades into gray and black areas. When I was thinking about doing this village, I was thinking about how the world seems to be fracturing into pieces, and the darkest parts of society are really taking hold in terms of things like poverty and intolerance and racism. And some of those words are actually quilted into the dark areas of this piece. I think it takes a village to do anything in terms of keeping the world going. And if we don't get it together, we're gonna sink into the dark.
Friendship Wheels is by Eve Howes. It is the fabric exchange quilt that she made for the show. It is quilted by Laura Davies of Concord, North Carolina. The design is a steampunk pattern by Jen Kingwell. She used all of our exchange fabrics and then added other ones to it. Eve said that it kind of scared her to piece the curves, but she said it was surprisingly easy and not to be afraid of curves. I love her variety of white backgrounds that she has used. This is a good example of how quilting can accentuate the piecing design and how much it adds the interest to it. Point of view. What I told you was true from the certain point of view, Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is Eve Howes' point of view quilt. Eve is one of our charm members that lives in North Carolina. She has pieced the background first using a fade fabric that fades from darker black down to the lighter gray. So she has pieced that and then appliqued on the 60-degree shapes on the outside of those. The quilting again is just exquisite, and it is by Laura Davies from North Carolina. The design is called Weight of Love pattern by Libs Elliott. The multi-directional shapes in this design symbolizes confusion, seeking truth. Lots of wonderful lines going on in that, and the beautiful color palette I think is just exquisite on that one.
Good afternoon, my name is Jane Lee and I've been a member of this group for about 10 years. This quilt was quilted by Kathy Franks for me. The cloth I'm going to talk about is the Gansu pot, which was from the category point of view. So we all like to hear stories. I believe that quilting is another way of telling a story. For weeks we touch and handle and love the fabric, and eventually this fabric develops a relationship with us. Not only do we tell stories, but we also have points of view. We all have points of view. Several years ago, I heard that I had been left 2 pots by a friend in his will. But these were something special. These pots were 3,000 before the Common Era, and they came from a part of China called Gansu province. If I wanted to bring these pots back to America, it would probably cost me about 2 airfares. So rather than spend that money on bringing the pots back, I decided to make these pots for my own home. These pots would be placeholders. Quilters have loads of ways of making things, and I used cloth to recreate these pots. and then surface decorations. The pots are made in the colour that was traditionally used by the Gansu community. So these are original colours, but with fabric that I had purchased. The next quilt that I made was also in the genre of the Gansu pots. This was my leftover pieces. So when you make a semicircle, as in the case of my pots, you have the belly piece that comes out, and then you have the other piece. And I used the rest, the pieces which has the hollow, to make the background for this quilt. All the belly or pot pieces are the colours and decorations on the Gansu pots. So this again was my own design, and I quilted it myself. The next quilt I'd like to talk about is one that I've called K is for Connie. At some stage, we all have those moments when we wonder, why on earth am I doing this? It's not giving me the joy it's supposed to. I decided I'd had it with quilting, and in a fit of desperation, called Connie with a C and asked for help. How could I use this exchange fabric which I'd already cut up and joined into strips? That's another thing that quilters do, especially when they are desperate. There were other women in the shop when I arrived, so I had to temper my desperation, but Connie was so calm. Choose a pattern you like, she said, and so the quilt began. You may notice that one of the fabrics has a K in the design. So that was their sign of what the name would be, K for Connie. This design was inspired by Anne Sullivan Quilt from the book Modern Quilts, Designs of the New Century by the Modern Quilt Guild. I abhor leftovers, whether it's in the kitchen or in the fabric world. What was I going to do with all the bits left over from my K for Connie quilt? Make another. This is traditional as my quilting tradition goes. The crumbs left over from Connie's quilt. This was quilted by Pam Reed, and the design was inspired by a picture from online.
I'm Judy Place, and I'm a longtime member of the Charm Club, so this would be my 17th exhibit. My first quilting I'm going to talk about is called Climbing the Wall. It is made and quilted by me on my long arm machine, and the design was adapted from the pattern Flower Power by Marguerite Rhine from the American Quilter magazine in May of 2021. The original pattern was flowers all over the quilt, trellis all over the quilt on a very black background. I decided that was a little dark for me, so I dropped away part of the trellis and used a white background in a much more asymmetrical design with negative space. The machine quilting was a challenge with much unsewing and redoing, so I titled this quilt Climbing the Wall because I was climbing the wall thinking I would never get it done. And I'm climbing the wall along with the flowers, the vines, and one tiny bug, should you choose to find it. The techniques that I used to make this quilt were freezer paper piecing, which is similar to paper piecing, which some of you might know, but requires much less ripping. The point of view quilt is called Looking Down Beneath My Feet is the Lowly Rag Rug. This is made and quilted by Judy Place. It is adapted from a design by Pam Reed in Quilters Newsletter magazine, December-January of 2012. It is machine pieced and machine quilted. For our theme, I decided to take the literal approach, not the opinion or point of view from my mind, but from looking down, looking up, looking around, looking over, looking through. Looking down, I remembered about a pattern I had seen a while ago, and it was a chance for me to use up some of my collection of plaid and striped fabrics. I like the way that the stripes give the impression of warp threads on a loom weaving a rag rug. And then the linear quilting gives the proper texture for the lumpy rag fabrics used in a real rug. This quilt is called the Split 9 Patch. It's made and quilted by Judy Place. It's part of the Fabric Challenge. The design was inspired by something seen on Pinterest about disappearing 9 patches, although these do not disappear. The techniques used are machine piecing and hand-guided long arm quilting. So I fell in love with the cool color palette of our fabric exchange and wanted to add pops of color from the hot spectrum. I inserted strips of hand-dyed fabrics to this very cute and simple pattern, which added just a small amount of zing that I was looking for. Machine quilting on this was a challenge for me in learning to do some ruler work. I hope that you'll enjoy it. This is another fabric challenge quilt by Judy Sweeney, and it was quilted by Judy Abeel of Gaylord, Michigan. This design, again, was inspired by those things we all see on Pinterest. The techniques used on this are machine piecing for the background, hand appliquing for the birds, and hand beading. Judy created the background for this quilt for another project using triangles, and as you can see, it's a very subtle piece background. She liked her fancy birds so much that she decided they needed beading. So if you put your face up in this quilt, and you can see they are very heavily encrusted with beads. This is called Point of View, Are the Stars Rising or Falling? This is made by Judy Sweeney. It was quilted by Judy Abeel of Gaylord, Michigan. The design is called Showering Stars from a pattern by Robin Pickens. The techniques that she used on this were machine piecing, and she used a jelly roll of fabrics for those sort of lines coming out from the stars. Her title, Are the Stars Rising or Falling? That really says it all about her point of view. This is a challenge quilt with the fabric challenge called Challenge 10. It's by Judy Sweeney. It is quilted by Celeste Ham of Lancaster, Kentucky. The design is by Anita Sitar, who is a quilt designer who has another pattern that's large and full size. This is rather small. Judy has also made the large quilt in blue and white fabrics. This is Judy's second house quilt by this designer. The other is bed-sized in all blues and resides in her home.
Jacob and the Journey Home. This is the Point of View quilt by Caitlin Kowski. She is from Bloomington, Indiana. It's an original design that she has stitched and quilted and done hand embroidery stitches on it. She has hand-dyed fabric, air-painted some of the fabrics, and commercially printed fabrics. This quilt is an interpretation of the incident in which the biblical Jacob meets and struggles through the night with a stranger on the edge of a river. He is returning home after 22 years away and must confront his brother Esau, who has vowed to kill him for having stolen his birthright and the blessings of his firstborn from their father. The struggle is intense, neither win, but Jacob is injured. He must confront himself and decide what kind of person he is to be. Jacob recrosses the river and continues homeward. He gives back the blessing and bows down to him and asks for forgiveness. The intriguing part about Kate's quilt is that she does use so much embroidery on hers to interpret her ideas and her themes of her quilts. Two-Step Harmonies by Caitlin Kowski. This is entered with the Fabric Challenge. She has began this quilt in one direction and has finished in a different direction. She started doing a color study with the fabrics that we had selected for the challenge. She said it was first thought to do it was to enjoy watching how each color changed as you moved it and used it with another color. As she made the smaller units, she decided that they needed to be more dancing on the quilt, and hence the quilt went into a totally different direction than what she had originally planned. And I think that's one thing we enjoy about quilting is the flexibility and how we can be creative and how we can change. She did do the machine quilting herself. She used hand-dyed fabrics and commercial fabrics, both in the quilt.
Pam Reed is also a fairly new member of the Charm Club, and she has created 3 pieces for our display this year. Her first piece in the Point of View section of the display is called Reflections. Pam used a design called Spotted Geese from the designer Brigitte Heitland of Zen Chic, and she used machine piecing and computerized machine quilting techniques. Pam said that this quilt with the triangle colors of blue and gold evoke her feelings for Ukraine, hope and prayers that they win their war. And she's dedicated this quilt to her friend Benny Coe, who is a doctor who has ventured to Hungary to help with the Ukrainian refugees. And Pam intends to give this quilt to him. Also in the Point of View section of our display by Pam Reed is Rested and Comfortable. This is a 23-inch by 29-inch quilt, so it's a small quilt, made and quilted by Pam from a design that was adapted from the pattern Steep Rock by the Blanket Statement. The quilting design is a computerized design called Modern Waves by Anita Hardwick. She said the quilting pattern is like sleepy, dreamy brain waves. She loves the optical illusion created by the wavy pattern over the hard edge, straight rows in the piece design. Sparkles is also made and quilted by Pam Reed. Her design was a pattern adapted from a pattern called Neon Days by Molly Sparkles. The quilting design is a Baptist fan that she sewed off on her computerized long arm quilting machine. Pam originally started this design in a larger format, but as she kept working on it and fussing with it, she decided that she didn't like the larger design and completely started again and created this smaller layout and the quilting pattern. And we all think both of them are totally delightful in either size.